Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining, and really excited to have Robert Gilbert here with us today over in the States. Thanks for joining us, Robert. I am going to unmute you. I'm not sure if I've actually unmuted you, so I'm just going to unmute you. There we go. Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great.
Awesome. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Robert. Robert's an amazing speaker. He's actually been around the world talking about topics metaphysical, esoteric, anything around the sacred geometry and biogeometry, crystals. He knows so much, and I've been so privileged to actually sit with Robert and have these deep dive conversations that I wish that people had a microphone to hear us, because so many people don't get to have those type topics revealed. So I was just so excited when I got to have a talk with you. So thank you so much, Robert.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
And we're going to be covering a lot of things that I'm very interested in, especially things around ancient Egypt and a lot of the gods and goddesses and how sacred geometry is in our lives. But I guess I really wanted to start by asking you, because I know you've got such a broad background in all different topics for spiritual science. I mean, can you actually just discuss a little bit what your background is for those of you that are watching that haven't met you before, just so that they understand just how amazing you are?
Well, I don't know if I can live up to that billing, but thank you so much. Uh, the short version of the background is in my early 20s, I joined the US Marine Corps. I became an instructor in the field of nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare survival. That allowed me to study physics, biology, chemistry, and I did so particularly with a focus on the structural aspects of these fields. And I found that by understanding the geometric structure behind all of natural existence, you could understand it much more easily than the complex mathematics that it's usually presented to people through. I then got my PhD in international studies. And since that time, I've devoted my energies into research into both Eastern and Western forms of spiritual development and energetic practices. So I've studied many different spiritual traditions around the world. I did residential training with the Clair Vision School of Australia with the late Dr. Samuel Sagan in Sydney in the late 90s. And I've studied extensively, particularly the work of Rudolf Steiner and the European Rosicrucians, as well as his other traditions. And then around the year 2000, I met Dr. Ibrahim Karim from Cairo, Egypt, the founder of biogeometry. And after studying with him intensively for several years, he was kind enough to invite me to be the first person outside of Egypt that's allowed to teach biogeometry to the public.
Amazing. And it's so important, I think, to have that science background as your preliminary foundation, because, I mean, it makes it a lot more approachable for people that are very into, science and spirit, but don't actually know how they correlate. And there is so much that works hand in hand, especially after studying biogeometry now for 3 years. It's just like the amazing things that they actually do in giving quantifiable, let's say, results. So yeah, it's really amazing that you definitely bring that to the table, and it comes in your teachings as well. So I have so much respect for that. So yeah,
Thank you.
you said you were in Australia for Clear Vision, right?
Yes, that's correct. At the Clear Vision School in Sydney. I was in the late 90s. And of course, I've been a few times since, including time I spent with you there a few years ago.
Yeah, very, very much. And so, how did you get into biogeometry?
So around the year 2000, I was giving a public lecture on the Egyptian temple science and sacred geometry. And a person came up to me at the end of the talk and said, "Have you heard of Dr. Ibrahim Karim from Cairo?" And I hadn't at that time. But he said he's going to be coming to the United States for the first time to teach information that previously had only been taught in Egypt, and that he knew things about the ancient Egyptian use of what we think of as sacred geometry for very practical purposes, and had done these incredible studies at the Egyptian National Research Center, and had proven that he could use particular types of geometric forms to affect human health and to change biological systems. And so I thought, well, I can't miss this. So I went to start studying with him, and he first came to the United States to teach. And I was just the person that whenever he was teaching something, I always showed up and was studying it in great detail, which led to him inviting me a few years later to become the first non-Egyptian instructor in the field.
So did you actually use biogeometry yourself for healing?
Yes, one of the things that really turned me on to it at the beginning was that there are many different subsystems inside of biogeometry. And one of the subsystems is called biosignatures. Biosignatures are the actual movement of energy inside of the organs and glands and all the parts of the human physical body, as well as aspects of the subtle or energetic bodies. And these three-dimensional energetic movements are then simplified into a two-dimensional linear energy pattern, and they're called biosignatures. Dr. Karim had been a part of the Egyptian National Hepatitis C Research Project, not because he's a specialist in Hep C by any means, but because they were testing all available methods that might be helpful for Hep C, which was epidemic in Egypt and North Africa at the time. And he put these biosignature patterns, which he had been the discoverer of. He had spent many, many years doing energetic analysis of the movement of energy in the organs and the human energy system to find these patterns. And then he simply put them onto particular medallions that people could wear. And his control group for the Hepatitis C Research Project from Al-Azhar University Pharmaceutical School in Cairo, all they did is they wore these particular medallions. They got no other treatment whatsoever for Hep C, but he ended up winning the research project. He was more successful than interferon or any Western pharmaceutical or even herbal remedies from Chinese medicine or anything else. And no one could understand it, that somehow this geometric pattern could have this incredible biological effect. And Dr. Karim also would tell people to understand it, you cannot see it as a static energy movement pattern. You can't see it as a static shape. You have to think of it as a dynamic pattern that energy is moving in, like electricity moving in a wire. And once you understand these geometric patterns as a dynamic energy movement pattern, you can begin to understand how these geometric patterns can actually affect biological life, biological health. And again, he had his own research group at the Egyptian National Research Center to investigate this, and he showed them all kinds of incredible, theoretically impossible things based on the energetics of geometric forms. So when I began to take courses with him in the United States now over 20 years ago, one of the things that he offered at the time as he was teaching us about the biosignatures and how to use them is we could all have a short private session with him, and he would then test us for which biosignatures we needed. And I had had a very serious car accident. Two cars head-on collision on the highway. The car that hit us was going about 90 out of control on a mountain road that was wet. We were going about 60, and just dead stop head-on collision. And so I had a lot of damage to my neck and spine. And so Dr. Karim found very specific biosignatures that he simply made energetically available to me, and that he also engraved onto a particular medallion for me to wear. And it really restored my quality of life. It was quite remarkable. And it showed me the power of this. I already believed in the background of it from all of my research in Eastern and Western energetic and spiritual systems. But I saw the power of what he had developed with it when I felt the effects myself and got back my mobility and got my normal life back through restoring the correct energy circulation in these parts of the body. So that was one of the things that got me to where with all the other topics I'm interested in that I spent so much time and energy focusing on biogeometry until he made me an instructor in the field.
Yeah, I can actually vouch for that. One of the girls that did your biogeometry course this year, because there was about 6 or 7 of us that did it, and she actually got a text message from her friend whose father was on his deathbed. Literally, the hospital said, "There's nothing we can do. Start saying goodbye," and she was absolutely distraught. And my friend who had done biogeometry found the biosignatures, put him in one of the grids, and I kid you not, the next day the friend of hers messaged her and she's like, "I don't know what you've done, but he's come out of coma and he's now actually back into recovering into full health." So, you know, the power of biogeometry still is just absolutely blown me away in how many times this actually works. And it's just, you know, the energy that moves from these signatures, because our body is all energy, and when you bring those signatures into wherever the blockage is, it completely shifts and moves whatever's happening. So it's just incredible.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah.
There was a young woman who came to one of my classes in the States, and after she'd taken the initial course, the foundation training, and came back then for the advanced training, she reported that a friend of hers, a young man, had had a motorcycle accident, and he was in a coma from the head-on collision he had on the motorcycle, and he hadn't regained consciousness. And so we had showed her a method where you could put these particular types of geometric forms on all the electromagnetic sources in a space, and that particularly in hospitals with so many electromagnetic fields around the body of the sick person, it makes it harder for their system to function with all the electromagnetic fields. And she said when she placed the last biosignature form, the last biogeometric form, on all these electronics that surrounded him in the hospital bed, at that moment, he woke up and opened his eyes. Because from our perspective, he was being suppressed from being able to come back into full consciousness by the suppressive effect of being surrounded by so many electromagnetic fields. Now, it's very important that we don't make any medical claims for reasons I think will be obvious to everybody. We make no medical claims whatsoever for biogeometry, and we teach it to people purely for experimental and exploratory purposes. But we hear these kinds of stories all the time because, of course, one of the key ideas behind any type of energy medicine, including behind biogeometry, is the ancient concept that everything that happens in the physical body is a result of the structures and patterns and energy flows of the energy body. Just like in Chinese medicine, the meridians are what feed the energy into the organs, etc. But what Dr. Karim has found with the biosignatures are things that had never existed before. These are simply the result of decades of tracing out the energy movements in the body and energy field to create these effects. But that's actually only one subfield of biogeometry. There are many, many subfields of biogeometry because we call it nature's design language. It is literally the language that nature uses of shape and form and geometry, as well as sound and color and angle and proportion and number. It's the design code behind everything that creates physical reality and the physical body and physical health.
Yeah. And I feel like, you know, we understand principles like when we talk about things like feng shui and how angles, sharp angles affect our energy, or, you know, certain things like where you can't put your bed where the entrance to the door is. So like we understand really basic principles, and it's kind of something that we touch upon, but we don't actually utilize because this technology or this, you know, information came from ancient Egypt. It's almost been brought back from Abraham. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about that because in biogeometry they talk about, you know, the netters and the gods, and so, you know, that fascinates me because I'm quite into all of the deities and personally working with deities, knowing that they're real, but in this course it actually quantifies them. So, you know, were the gods real back then in ancient Egypt?
So one of the first things that Dr. Karim taught me from the perspective of the Egyptian system, because again, I'd studied quite a lot of other systems around the world, He said the first thing you have to understand is that when you read old Egyptian texts that are translated into modern languages like English, they take some ancient terms and they put it into modern terms. Particularly, they take the term neter and then they call that a god or a goddess. And they say the modern concept of an anthropomorphized god or goddess is not the exact same thing they thought in ancient Egypt when they used the term neter. And in the hieroglyphic language, there are particular hieroglyphs that have the phonetic value of NTR. And so the term neter in ancient Egypt became the term nature in modern European languages. And so a neter, when you see these pictures of Isis or Horus or Osiris, first of all, those aren't their names in ancient Egypt. Those are the Greek names, but that's where we get taught for them. The name of Osiris is a Greek name. He was called Azra or Alzer in the original Egyptian work. And he's understood as being a neter, not exactly the same thing as a god or goddess. He's a conscious force of nature. He is the conscious force of death and rebirth. And so they understand that every function in the universe is related to a conscious being or a conscious force that administers that particular function. We're taught growing up today in our science that everything is a dead clockwork mechanism that evolved through pure chance, and there's no rhyme or reason behind it. It's just something that happened randomly. But in all the classical traditions, including ancient Egypt, they understood that there's a consciousness behind all the elements, behind all the functions of nature, that consciousness is the foundation of everything. And that consciousness then goes from the grand consciousness that encompasses all to then particular states of individualized consciousness of beings far above our level that actually administer all these forces of nature. And so the first thing we understand then is that the neters are the conscious forces of nature. And the thing is that they don't speak earthly languages. They don't speak or understand English or Russian or German. They understand the neters' design language. Now, that's why we said a moment ago that biogeometry is nature's design language, which in the deeper level is the neters' design language. And so the language they understand is the language that they use to create the world. And that is shape, sound, color, motion, angle, proportion. And so all of these are like a palette that like an artist can use. And in biogeometry, we learn to use all these different qualities to create energetic effects, because there's a universal spectrum of energy that has all the possible energetic effects you could ever want. Just like in Chinese medicine, there are things that are more yin, there are things that are more yang, things that are activating, things that are sedating, things that are warming, things are cooling. All these different activities are related to a state of consciousness. Now, the higher consciousness that is always active to administer this can be communicated with, but you can only communicate with it through this design language. That's the most effective method. For any higher non-physical being to communicate with the physical plane through a physical language is a big stretch for them. But they know the language of creation: shape, sound, color, motion, angle, proportion. So those are our building blocks in biogeometry. And through that, we can communicate with the neters. And then when I've worked with some Egyptians who are very advanced in this, I've seen them able to change the weather and all kinds of things in really remarkable ways. And you ask them how they did it, they kind of smile and shrug and say, you know, I asked the netters for help. But it's really about understanding this natural coding system of all of the qualities that make up the world and knowing what the functions of that color, of that sound, of that shape is. And to make it simple in biogeometry, we focus primarily on the shape language, but it applies to every other form of sound healing, color healing, etc. They can all be brought into this unified body of knowledge.
Yeah, it's amazing. It kind of brings into context the whole principle of ritual and how ritual was created around this language that the ancient people understood, because we weren't bombarded with all of this, technology and stuff. So they were in the world understanding this, attachment to nature and how it was the living force that was all around them that they could connect and communicate with. And so you hear about like the buffalo women and the tea gods, and these people were actual netters, or they were the beings that they connected to in this medicine. So I've personally worked with biogeometry and connecting into the netters, and have taken photos of the most amazing beings that have come through and connected through this language, because they understand it, they understand these principles. And so it's actually really blown me away just how incredible this technology really is. And so the ancient Egyptians understood this, and I assume that's kind of why they had the pyramids and the hieroglyphs. Can you talk a little bit about that in the context of how they used that?
Yes, and it's a huge topic. I'll just touch on a few points. One is that the hieroglyphic language is, of course, a language of shape. And one of the pioneers of the rediscovery of what I would refer to as the hidden energy science behind what we think of today as sacred geometry, which includes the hidden energy science and lost aspects from ancient Egypt. A lot of the initial work to rediscover those secrets was done in the early 1900s in France. Now, this was the foundation of what today we call French radiesthesia, or vibrational radiesthesia. It's not mental dowsing, but it uses things like pendulums, etc., to be able to detect very specific energetic qualities. And these energy qualities have very precise biological and energetic effects. And so one of the early researchers, a man named Louis Turin, who was a radio wave technology expert, he's the one that created what we call the universal vibrational spectrum. Today, through modern science, we analyze two basic spectrums that all of our technology is based on. The first spectrum is the electromagnetic spectrum, and we've created a whole bunch of mechanical tools to analyze the electromagnetic spectrum. But that's actually the life energy after it's passed through the physical level and has begun to decay. That's the electromagnetic. Then above that is the physical level, and we analyze that with the periodic table of elements. But above that is the level of the ether, chi, ki, prana, the level of the dynamic vital life force that makes things alive, that was known to every classical tradition, and they all had names for it. But in modern times, we don't have a spectrum of it. We don't understand how to analyze the spectrum of living energy itself. So the foundation of this was created by this radio wave technology expert from France named Louis Turin. So in one of his books, he wrote an incredible book in 1942 called The Scientific Control of All Natural Waves. It's only been published in French. And in that book, he shows an illustration of Egyptian hieroglyphs. And then he shows how many of those hieroglyphs on old temple walls in Egypt, somebody's come by later with a chisel and they've cut through the form of the shape of the hieroglyph. And with his vibrational detection tools, he could detect that off of the original shapes of the hieroglyphs, you can detect specific energies coming off of that shape. But it's like an electrical circuit. So when somebody came by later with a chisel and they cut the continuous line of the boundary of the hieroglyph, it neutralized it. And with his tools, you don't pick up any energy coming from it. It's like cutting an electrical conducting wire. Now it can't transfer the energy. And so the hieroglyphic language had the capacity to actually send out particular energy qualities, energy emissions from the shape information. Now, the French later followed up with that and developed the idea that they called the shape-caused wave. So, for example, for somebody in modern Egyptology, where everything is very abstract, they'll look at a shape like the Ankh from ancient Egypt, and they'll say, oh, this is like a symbol that represents life. And that's generally true, but there's something much deeper behind it, which is that if you make an actual three-dimensional Ankh, you'll get a very specific energy quality coming off the top of it that has the effect of helping to grow living forms. That comes off of the top of the rounded form of the Ankh. And if you were to compare that to color therapy or color healing, it's connected to the effect of the green energy quality that nature has. It creates growth and these types of things. It's detoxifying. The opposite end of the Ankh, the base of the Ankh, is something that sends out an exact opposite energetic ray that the French called negative green. It's not green. It's an invisible energy If we perceived it as any color, we would just see it as gray because we don't have a sense organ to perceive the color of it. But off the base of the Ankh is a very penetrating energy ray called negative green that the French found could penetrate thicknesses of lead that could not be penetrated by X-rays. And so when you see these so-called symbols from ancient Egypt, including the hieroglyphs or these other symbols, then as we show in biogeometry, where we teach people how to directly detect the energies coming off these things, so it's no longer an abstract concept, you can actually detect it for yourself and then start applying it, you'll begin to see the way that these things do have energetic emissions and energetic functions. And that's where we then get into the specifics of different energy qualities and what functions they perform. That's how Dr. Karim could do things at the Egyptian National Research Center to put living forms into suspended animation, not kill them, but stop their growth process and then bring it back just by adding or removing certain geometric forms.
Yeah. So it's like they understood this and used it for initiation processes and, particular aspects of their culture. And, I was really amazed at how it was related to the robbers as well. Like, when the robbers would go into the tombs and they would get these crazy illnesses because the Egyptians understood how to work with these different types of dynamic motions to stop the robbers from being able to take all of the gold from the kings and queens, and how specific kings and queens had like rings that would protect them from these energies.
That's right. So one of the most famous aspects of this curse of the pharaohs, the curse of the mummies type of thing that became very popularized in the English-speaking world around the 1920s, 1930s, was when the English went into the tomb of Tutankhamun and other tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And it became very well known that many of the people that entered into the tombs, they began to get strange maladies that could not be diagnosed by any medical doctor. And then they went downhill quickly and died. But one of the people who did not get sick was one who had been given a particular type of ring from ancient Egypt. And it had a very particular shape on it. And this was discussed in some of the work of another one of the French researchers, a man named de Balazal. And de Balazal talked about the way that this one Englishman wearing this ring was protected from this negative green energy and some of these other mysterious energy qualities that were built into the Egyptian tombs. Now, another part of this then leads to the understanding of the Egyptian temple science in the West today is very minimal. A lot of the basic concepts we just don't possess. But one of their aspects is that they saw human subtle bodies in a particular way. So when a person dies, their higher bodies leave the physical body, and the spirit then goes on to the higher worlds. So the body that animates the physical body, we call the etheric body in the West from the Greek term ether. They may call it chi in China or prana in India, but everybody had a name for it in the ancient world. But that vital life force they called the Ka in ancient Egypt. And in the back of the tombs, there would be a false door with a hole in it, and they call it the Ka hole. And behind that door is a wooden sculpture with the body shape of the person whose body is in the tomb. So the question is, why would they create this false door in the back of the tomb with a wooden statue with the exact same geometric shape as the physical body of the person who died? And that is that normally the Ka, the etheric body, after a person dies, if they haven't done a lot of spiritual work to develop the etheric body further, it just begins to break up. After about 3 days, it begins to break up and goes back to what the Chinese call the universal chi field. But the Egyptian temple science knew how to preserve the Ka from breaking up, and they would actually keep it alive and preserved in the tomb, where as a body of energy, it could strike at the energy body of people that violated the tomb. Because to be a grave robber or a necromancer was a crime punishable by terrible tortures and death in ancient Egypt. And so they wouldn't cause any physical damage to a person. The type of damage that they would cause in modern times could only be detected by a very advanced shaman or someone who's very advanced in Chinese medicine. And they would then have a type of energetic assault that could block an energy meridian flow, that could break the pattern of a chakra that would tear the delicate inner webbing of the human energy system, these kinds of things. So that's part of that hidden knowledge. They understood about how the subtle bodies work. They understood about the way that these energy patterns work. And so things like the Curse of the Pharaohs is linked to a much deeper story that the people writing the newspaper articles have no concept of.
It's so fascinating, and like, you know, the depth that they understood these things is just incredible, because, you know, like you said, the people that study ancient Egypt, they don't understand these principles. They just come up with these, you know, things like, oh, ancient tools that were used, and they kind of, you know, give it this really vanilla version of what it really used to be. So it's very fascinating to understand it from that deep complexity.
A great illustration of that is that there's a particular medical papyrus from ancient Egypt that for a long time, Egyptologists said, oh, well, this is purely symbolic because it shows them cutting open a person's head and cutting open the brain. So it's like some symbolic ritual. It's not real. But then they found out later, once we developed modern brain surgery, they found out it was a text on brain surgery. Until then, they dismissed it as something purely symbolic and metaphorical. And this happens time and time again with the knowledge from ancient Egypt. They are not understanding what they're working with. Until we develop that technology again, they can't even recognize it. And that's why if you go to displays of ancient Egyptian artifacts in many museums, you'll find something that's a pendulum from ancient Egypt that the Egyptians call the Waj pendulum. And it emits the negative green penetrating carrier wave from its tip. But you'll find hundreds of these in different museums around the world. In almost every case, next to it in the case, is a little label that calls it a ritual object, because anything that they don't know what it is, they call a ritual object. And what it was a practical pendulum for detecting or projecting specific energy qualities.
Yeah, and you know, I loved when you know, you've taught these courses. You explained how back in those days, you know, the priests and the priestesses were kind of like the highest hierarchy. They were the ones that the kings and queens would go to, and so this technology is really like for the higher up, and it's so amazing that we now have the ability to actually learn this and understand it. So I'm just curious, how did the Egyptians come across this technology? Who brought it to them?
If you go back to the original Egyptian sources, one of our best sources for this are the ones coming from the Greeks, because the actual deeper teachings from the Egyptian temples, a lot of them were never made public in any form. An Egyptian temple was not like a church or a synagogue or a mosque in the West today. People didn't go to it on Sunday for a service. They were places of initiation that only the initiates went in. The average person would never see the interior of the temple. And so within this entire type of temple science that they had developed, there was extremely advanced knowledge of how these things work, but they would never teach it to the general public. And part of it was you had to prove yourself that you would not misuse that knowledge, because this is actually teaching you the hidden background of energy behind everything that exists in the physical world. And if you go back to the original Greek text, so for example, there's a writing by Plato, and he's giving a dialogue from Solon, who's a Greek who is being trained in the Egyptian temples. And he's writing verbatim what the Egyptian priests taught him. And in this writing from Plato, the Egyptian priest is saying, oh, you Greeks, you're like little children. You don't have any deep ancient knowledge. In what we have here in Egypt, we've had this for thousands of years, but the knowledge is much more ancient than that. And that's where the term Atlantis comes from, because in this particular dialogue from Plato, that's where they say this came from an earlier civilization that was destroyed under the waves, and its name was Atlantis. And so this goes back to very ancient forms of technology. Today, once again, modern science just dismisses Atlantis as some ancient myth, even though there's plenty of archaeological evidence for a universal deluge and things being underwater at the times that they're indicating. But that's really where it came from. It came from the earlier cultures. Egypt became a repository of the high temple knowledge of cultures so ancient we can barely begin to conceive of the way that they thought of things. And they were the bridge to bring it into the modern world. So it's from Egypt that the Greeks and the Hebrews and everybody got their modern Western spiritual science and created everything we have in the Western system today. And no doubt there was some exchange with the East as well.
Amazing. It's just incredible. And I'm curious, like now that this has been brought back, is there a particular reason? Because, you know, it was hidden for such a long time. Like, I don't know if you want to share the story about how Abraham actually came across this information in France. And I'm just, you know, how relevant is this to our ascension, I guess?
So this knowledge is things that had never been made public before. Biogeometry is making public information that had always been hidden and part of very closed initiation systems every time in the past. Now, this is not something that Abraham was like given in some secret society and they said, okay, here's the secrets. Abraham did have certain things within his family line, because they were in a very advanced part of Egyptian society, where he had certain artifacts and things handed down to him. But he didn't get it as some complete teaching. Rather, Abraham is a very remarkable person who was, from the time he was a very young man, recognized by all types of advanced healers and seers and things, just a remarkable person. And he began to do his own research into this to rediscover those lost secrets of ancient Egypt. And partly because of his position in Egypt, he managed to get access to all kinds of incredible people and incredible things. And so he found from a Coptic Christian medical doctor in Egypt about the French discoveries in vibrational radiesthesia, about finding some of the keys to the energy science of ancient Egypt. Then he went to France to go to the place they all worked. That was the early 1970s. They were mostly all dead by that time. But one elderly lady, who was the widow of the founder, said, I've been waiting for you for so long to show up. But Abraham hadn't told anybody he was coming, but she was nonetheless expecting him. And she gave him for free all of the research notes, all of the original equipment, etc., from all of these incredible French researchers. Abraham refers to it as a treasure one could not buy. And he took it back to Egypt to work with. Then as he began to work at the French work and add to it what he knew from the Egyptian work, he'd been partially trained by the person who ran the Museum of Ancient Egyptian Medicine, Dr. Fawzi Solomon, as well as many other incredible people, as well as his own original research. And so as Dr. Karim began to discover these things and began to talk about them publicly, there were always people that popped up and said, you can't talk about this publicly. This has never been made public before. But Dr. Karim's idea on this is that we are making public now so much destructive technology that if we do not make available the keys to these systems for the people of good intent who are looking for it and cannot access that information, we have no chance of survival. Abraham will often refer to the Earth today as the Titanic, and we're going to have to save the Titanic before it goes down. The way that all the things in modern science and technology and the Earth's health is going, the death of the oceans, the degradation of all natural systems, the loss of natural species, the genetic pollution of the human body and the biosphere. These are all things that are accelerating so quickly, we're going to have counterforces for it. And so things that were never taught to the public before, Abraham is very consciously and intentionally making available to the public. And I really caught that wave from working with him. And it's one reason I've been so excited to develop the work further and to get it out to as many people as I can. And the thing is that this work, even biogeometry, we only taught it in live courses until the COVID epidemic hit. And then we couldn't do live courses anymore. Now, the reason we only taught it live, although we did open it to just about everybody, where in the past it was very closed, we taught it live so that we could make sure that we could work with people one-on-one on being able to develop the skills to detect the energy. Because just knowing it is not enough. You have to be able to detect and work with the energy directly. And so we did that in a live format. But with the COVID disaster, Abraham recognized that since we can't do things live anymore, we need to get this into an online format. And so I spent a year transferring all of my live courses into an online format, which is now so much larger than what we used to teach in the live format. It's like literally 3 times the material, just because we have the time for it now. And so at this point, we're making available to people anywhere in the world who want to connect through the internet the foundation and advanced trainings in biogeometry. And so that's where I think you've mentioned to people that the next one that I have coming up is the foundation training that's happening in November. And so that's been a huge change for us, that now not only is it available to everybody, it was very closed before, but it can actually be done online, where it was only available live before. And that's because we have practice coaches to help with the online format and work one-on-one with people in the online format. Most of it is through a format where everything is pre-recorded videos and manuals and things of that kind that you can do at your own pace at home within the timeline of the course. We have 3 weeks of the course, and we give it to you about 2 weeks ahead of time to give you a head start with the material. And then during the 3 weeks of the course itself, people just have to join us on one day of each week, where for 4 hours we go into the material, up to 4 hours, depending on the number of people in the course. So we've been able to now not only open it up to everybody, but to now make it just in the last year and a half to have it online.
It's an amazing course. I'm such a believer and have had, you know, some of the students come through already this year and do it, and they absolutely cannot stop talking about how they're excited, you know, to do the next level and what's coming. So, I mean, I am such a, you know, to bring it back to all of those things, you know, the warnings of what we need to, you know, get on board. This is just so important. You know, I've made myself available to anyone that's in Australia that wants to learn this deeper, and I've taken, you know, the girls and the boys that have done it already onto the field, and just to share something that was miraculous, or you know, not even miraculous, just the fact that when we actually cleared a field, because we, you know, learn how to what's the word, bring into harmony the ley lines. We did this whole field for a friend's farm, and not only did one but two swarms of natural bees made homes around that area. So I was just like, this is just amazing to see that just from changing one area, it already brought back into equilibrium, you know, the bees coming back and making a home. It was just like incredible when you hear about the news of the bees dying, and it's like, if the bees go, then we're screwed basically. So, you know, this is just like the most amazing, you know, revelation really to man.
So we do our best in biogeometry to teach it in a universal energy science that can be applied to the land, it can be applied to any living being, it can be applied to human beings, and it can be applied for designing anything. So anything that you design has the optimal energetic characteristics. And so one of the aspects of using it with nature is that it can be used to create the optimal energetic harmonics in an environment, whether it's within a home or out in a landscape, that is beneficial to, in this case, the honeybees. We've done some of the same work in the United States because the honeybees are dying off, and if the pollinators die, we're in huge trouble. But a lot of it is that we're creating so many detrimental electromagnetic fields and things that scramble their energy system that it's hard for them to survive. And one of those things inside of biogeometry is something that Dr. Karim calls humanizing modern technology. How do you change the detrimental vibrational information being carried by all of our modern technology to instead carry the vibrational characteristics that support and strengthen life itself? And that's an absolutely essential body of work. So we teach it in biogeometry so that whatever a person's interest is, whether they're a farmer or they work in landscape architecture or they work in architecture, they work in interior design, or they do some form of energy healing, or they're involved in some medical field, or they do graphic design, or they do physical design, it doesn't really matter. This is a universal energy science that can be applied to almost anything. And our goal is to get enough people trained in it that this really does change the trajectory of what's happening on the planet right now.
Absolutely. So if we could implement this into technology, like change the ways that our computers are made, so that way, you know, we're not absorbing all of this EMF, it could do the opposite. It could actually project all of these beneficial energies into our body and help us to live a harmonious life.
Just today, I was teaching one of the weekends for the Biogeometry Advanced training in an online format. So one of the things that we were talking about is there's a system in the advanced training of biogeometry called the Modulor System. And you can put together things in numerical proportions in such a way that they create extremely beneficial vibratory harmonics. Now, we discussed the way that that could be applied for things like constructing computer chips or anything that you use computer-assisted design for. We could really transform all modern technology to have a completely transformed vibrational base and a completely changed effect on living biological beings on the planet. And that's something Dr. Karim has demonstrated in all kinds of projects in universities and governments and things for decades now. And so the goal is now to get it out to enough people that it has enough critical mass. But it is a science. It does take a while to teach it. It's something that a person has to immerse themselves in for a few weeks to get really everything of the foundation training. And again, take at least a few weeks to get the foundations of the advanced training. And very exciting for us, after the foundation and advanced trainings, there hasn't been any levels of training beyond that, except special topics that Dr. Karim offers. But he's about to publish his major text on what he calls the physics of quality, this whole revolution in understanding science. And he's going to release what he's calling the Inner School of Biogeometry. And for people that have completed the foundation and advanced trainings by mid next year, they would be able to do directly with Dr. Karim in an online format the Inner School of Biogeometry, who releases a whole nother level of the information. Dr. Karim is in his late 70s now, and he's doing his best to get all this information out. And so there's something really exciting happening right now with this next level about to be released next year. And that's also has led us to increase the number of people we let into the courses so that we can get people through the foundation and advanced in time for them to take directly with Dr. Karim while he's still here, this Inner School of Biogeometry.
Yeah, it's really exciting. We're very much looking forward to that. And I've had lots of conversations with spirit from my guides, and this technology, this information is so important. And I personally am working towards getting as many people to understand this, because like you said, it's a critical mass. Like, this is the power, right? This is the divine power being brought into our hands. I've seen miracles time and time again, clearing people's homes that had no idea why they were sick or their children were unwell, and having these amazing results. And I just think, if everyone could do that to their home, they would have this sense of security and protection, knowing that they've got that, under their belt, because, that's what it's going to take if things are, this desperate. So I know that Dr. Karim is such a humble person. Like, he would never kill anything. That's not what he's about. He's always said it's always about harmonizing, and that's what biogeometry does. It's actually bringing into harmony. And I think so people understand that concept, the duality of dark and light is about, the polarity. But what biogeometry does is it brings it into the center, and the center is the unified quality of the centering vibration, or what I consider the God connection, right? Because
yes,
God is such a huge word to say, but I consider God the ultimate, the unconditional love frequency. And so having that ability to connect into that and to bring that into your resonance is so important right now.
So this is something of great significance for people to understand how biogeometry is different from some other energetic systems. Most energetic systems today follow the type of Chinese medicine concept of yin and yang polarities. And so whether you do sound healing or use color therapy or all types of energy medicine techniques today, even pharmaceuticals today, follow the concept of energy balancing through applying an opposite polarity. If a system is underactive, you apply something that's more yang or activating to try to push it toward the center. Or if it's overactive, you apply a yin polarity to try to pull it toward the center. But you apply an opposite polarity to try to pull something just enough to center it again. Biogeometry is different. We don't apply an opposite polarity to balance things. We actually apply the energy quality of the center. Now, most people aren't even aware there is an energy quality of the center. This is one of Dr. Karim's big contributions to the field. We have a specific tool that we use in biogeometry that detects the specific energy quality of the center. This does not balance things by applying an opposite polarity. It activates the center of the system itself. So the system activates its own equilibrium point. And so this is one of the first things we teach people in the foundation training is what is the centering vibration? How do we activate it in a person, place, or thing? How do we activate it through design? And how can you directly detect this energy of the center? And then the deeper we go into biogeometry, you begin to see there's all kinds of deeper layers of it. We can only teach it one piece at a time. But one of the things we first show people is that the center of any geometric form has this vibrational quality of the center, which has the effect of balancing and harmonizing the energy field of any living being. But then we show them that that center of the geometric form is in resonance with a specific plane, what we think of in the West today as the divine plane, but they had a different name for it in ancient Egypt. And so when people talk about ascension, they talk about multidimensional models. The concept of that in ancient Egypt was of multiple planes of existence. And the different planes of existence interpenetrate the physical world. They're not somewhere out there. And all these different planes of existence we can become conscious of. And so you'll find in design work in biogeometry that centering vibration that we work with is literally a signature of connecting to the divine plane. But we also teach people methods, particularly in the advanced training, of being able to consciously navigate through any plane or subplane level when you're working with any person, place, or thing. So you can know when you're working with the physical level, the vitality level, the emotional astral level, the mental level, causal level, spiritual level, or divine level. And then we drill down deeper and we start teaching how to work with the subplanes of these different planes. So for example, mental subplane 8 is a place where people often go out of balance in their energy field because they have not properly digested the traumatic information that they're constantly taking in from their environment and from the news. But it's a very specific structure within the subtle energy field. So when people talk about multidimensional navigation and ascension, things like this, we have a very precise language and science where you can directly detect and apply these energies on all these different plane levels.
And so just to be clear, when you're in the center can, obviously heal anything. It does it's like, if you have a virus, if you have bacteria, if you have, any type of illness, we can bring it into harmony. And so then we're basically not how do I explain it to somebody that's basically wants to use this for their own protection for their health?
So first off, I'll use my usual caveat that we don't make any medical claims for the work, but the concept behind it is that when you talk about the divine plane, or you talk about the centering vibration, in a sense, they're deeply connected, but that's the unity level. At the unity level where everything is one and there's no differentiation, there's no duality, that's where you have the centering vibration. That's the unified field. That's what they call the singularity in physics. That's the source of everything. There's no creation yet. That's the singularity, that's the unified field. It has to separate into duality. When it separates into duality and polarity, then you have the capacity for movement. You have the capacity for creation. You have attraction and you have repulsion. Now you begin to get movement. And to understand what shape is just a crystallized crust of an energy movement pattern. Energy movement is the basis of all life. And so in biogeometry, we teach things that's literally not available anywhere else today about how to work with that energy quality of the unified field, the unified state, the centering vibration, and to use that to harmonize other energies that you can bring in that are of a polarized nature. Because the centering vibration, the energy of that original singularity from the center of everything, is not differentiated. It's a universal harmonizing energy. It's what keeps things in balance, puts them in equilibrium. And then you can apply all the other systems that you might have learned from color healing, sound healing, energy medicine, etc., using polarized energies. And when you apply that, then when you apply that harmonizing force, it balances it so much better than just applying the polarities by themselves. So the ancient temple science was based on understanding unity, and it's split into polarity. And how when you apply a polarity to get more yin, more yang, we had a system in a particular direction, you also activate the center to harmonize the whole process so it's perfectly balanced. That's the simplest explanation I can give to it, but in application, of course, there's a tremendous number of details for how you actually apply it and detect the effects of it. In biogeometry, we don't energy balance anything and just assume it's done. Everything is done with very specific energy testing to make sure we achieved the result we were looking for. Now, again, we don't make any medical claims for it. We just have people who have had fantastic results report on their results. But I'm not a medical doctor, so we can't make the medical claim directly.
No, I understand. And you know, I've spoken to, you know, indigenous interpreters, and they've brought to me this concept of like how the white person doesn't understand about energy. And they gave this reference of like, you know, there's one rock and two rocks on one side, and you move one rock to the other side and people just think, oh, now you've got two rocks and one rock. But then there's that concept of the movement of what happened between that transition that these people understood, that everything has a cause and effect. And so what biogeometry is really bringing into awareness is that cause and effect quality. What happened and how did it actually change that transformation, and how are we going to quantify that so that we can understand, you know, how to bring that into an equilibrium, or, you know, bring it into a harmonious state. And so, you know, there's a lot of traditional texts like the labyrinths and, you know, all of these sacred spots that you test, and you can find this centering vibration. So, you know, it's not just the Egyptians that understood it. It's definitely something that has been, you know, around for many, many lifetimes of understanding.
This is the universal knowledge of the great temple sciences of ancient times. And so for any civilization that still maintains a knowledge from its ancient core, like the Aboriginal cultures in Australia, they're going to maintain some of that knowledge from that ancient system, because in a different state of consciousness, you just perceive that effortlessly. The thing about the Egyptian system is that it had one of the most complete technical accumulations of the knowledge into a complete spiritual science of virtually any world culture. And so to be able to get access to that in the level of detail and specificity that it holds is one reason that I feel that this particular system is of such value today. Because to work with modern technology and the very complex modern challenges to all living systems that we have, that level of specificity and technical detail is of great use.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we're getting to the end of our time, and it's just, I could ask you so many questions and go on and on. I know, I very, very much respect your time, and thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to share about your course? It's starting in November, isn't it?
Yes, it's starting in November. We're actually going to close the course out within the next couple of weeks. And that's because we need lead time, because we're now doing it online. We have to get the tools from Egypt and ship them to people who are in the training so that they can get them in time to use them for the training itself. So for people, particularly who are not in the United States where I am, if we got to ship it to Australia or New Zealand, etc., it takes a little while to get there. So the course is open for registration for another couple of weeks. And on my website, Vesica, VESICA.org, there's a connection there. And I think that Kassandra is making available to people a direct link to the page on my website where you can read more about the training or sign up for it online. And then it'd be a matter of, and we do say there that there are some tools that are required for the course. Otherwise, you won't be able to directly detect and work with the energy. You have to have certain tools to do that. And so we close the course out a bit earlier. We'll be closing it out in early October so that we can ship the tools to people. So when we make the course available in later October for them to access online, they'll have the tools they need to start doing the work. And then there'll be one day on the weekend for 3 weekends of November that will have the live review sessions. And what we primarily do with that is we do it according to times in North America. So that might be a time that's like very early in the morning or something in Australia, New Zealand time. But if we get enough people from Australia and New Zealand, I'll do a specific session. Like if we get 10 or more people from Australia and New Zealand, I'll do a specific session that's timed for something that's like reasonable, like this time on Sunday morning for people in Australia and New Zealand. If we don't get that critical mass, then you would join us with whatever is in your time, the time that we're doing it in North America. But thank you so much, Kassandra, for the interview and for helping get the word out about biogeometry. In addition to the page you're going to link to people with information about biogeometry, I also have a number of videos on YouTube that you're welcome to watch that describe this work more. And also there's other videos and things about other bodies of work that we do with sacred geometry, in addition to biogeometry. Biogeometry is a very specific field, and spiritual science and things of that kind. So thank you so much for all of your support, Kassandra.
My pleasure. I'm going to send the link as well to your Gaia presentation so that anyone that wants to hear about sacred geometry, such an interesting talk as well.
That's
Very,
great.
very
I've got
exciting.
a couple of talks on the Gaia TV channel, interviews, and the interviews led to them hiring me to do a complete sacred geometry TV series that's supposed, right now I'm writing it, we're going to be recording it soon, and it's supposed to then be on the Gaia channel in June of next year, this complete sacred geometry series. But let me just say, sacred geometry is the larger topic of the use of geometry, number, shape, form in every tradition on the planet. Biogeometry, I like to define in that context as the hidden energy science inside sacred geometry.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very cool. Amazing. Thank you so, so much. Thank you everyone for watching. And yes, many blessings.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
All right. Bye.